Hello guys, today we will be talking about RPG-22 Netto, Soviet single-shot anti-tank grenade launcher. This launcher was developed in the late 70s in factory Basalt. Its main purpose was to address the issue with RPG-18 that basically didn't have enough armor penetration. This one addressed the issue of the appearance of Abrams M1 and Challenger 1 tanks, with armor piercing capability of 400 mm of rolled homogeneous armor, 1 meter of reinforced concrete, and 1.2 meter of brick wall, which is 25% better than RPG-18 with the PG-18 projectile. This one have projectile PG-22 and the launcher have caliber 72.5 mm. The launcher was produced from 1980 to 1993. Also, license production was established in Bulgaria in the VMZ Sopot factory that also produces to this day the upgraded version of RPG-22 called Bullspike. What I always found funny and amusing is that when you unpack those from the transport box, they are in plastic sealing, but the paper cover on it is very bright pink. So for some time when I entered the armed forces, I actually didn't even know that those are grenade launchers just because of the bright colors of the packaging. The sights have increments 50, 150 and 250 meters. Also the grooves on the very top of the sights are basically your quick zero, battle zero for some close engagements inside 100 meters. The PG-22 heat rocket have muzzle velocity of 133 meters per second. Of course, it's shaped charge that use 360 grams of OCFOL explosive. Weight of projectile is 1 kg 480 grams. The total weight of the launcher is 2.7 kilograms. In my opinion, the RPG-22 have actually quite good ergonomy, because you can use your right shoulder or left shoulder because the sights are in the middle. Also your head is high enough, so there is some interface with your hearing protection, but not as terrible as on the modernized Bullspike. That is almost impossible to fire with hearing protection with some level of comfort. Also, what I forgot about the sight is that of course we getting the temperature compensation that is right here. So in the minus temperatures we set it on minus, plus temperatures on plus. When you have temperatures around 0, it's generally recommended that anything under 10 degrees Celsius you actually put the minus already. Also, what is actually a factor that, let's say that it's winter, but you just pulled the launcher out of car where it's hot inside, and you want to fire the launcher, the entire rocket, the propellant, it's warmer, so you don't really need to do that. Also, why even have the temperature compensation? That's because of the lower performance of the propellant inside the rocket in the minus temperature. Basically, in cold, it losing a little bit of the power, let's say, so that's why we need to basically very slightly bigger angle to hit into the same spot like when we have hot outside. What replaced the RPG-22 was RPG-26. The RPG-26 started to be produced in 1985. It addressed some of the issues that we will go through, mainly the complexity when actually want to make the grenade launcher to fire, and also of course better armor piercing capability. Another issue that RPG-26 addressed is that RPG-18 and RPG-22 that we have here, once you make it ready to fire, it's actually not possible to collapse it back together. This led to some interesting accidents when you have basically soldiers playing with the launcher. You can call it practicing inside their barracks, and then they need to go to commander that their launcher is extended. Of course, the punishment will inevitably follow. So now, how to get the RPG-22 ready to fire? So on the carry sling you have this little pocket with your hearing protection. The hearing protection is just in form of 2 cotton squares that you are supposed to roll and put in your ears. The squares look something like this. Nobody really used those ever, and in this concrete example, those cotton squares basically falling apart just because of the age of the launcher. So, once you secured some degree of hearing protection, what you do is that you lift this front pin and you pull it out completely. Then you take this front brown part and you extend forward. What will happen in that moment is that your front sight will erect. It will just pop up like so. What I do personally then is that I already place the launcher on my shoulder, and with help of these grooves, let's say, I pull back on this part. What happened then is that the rear cover opens up. Just after that you lift up this little metal square on the hinge pin like so. What that does is that this is your rear side, but also there is trigger right under it. On the trigger you basically press from top. Once the rear side is up, there is no other safety. You just pull on the trigger, that's it. Let's say that the target disappeared for a second, you have the launcher extended. Just to make it somewhat secure, you collapse back the rear side, basically covering the trigger. Also, what actually happens sometimes is that the grenade launcher actually don't fire. What you can do then is that you put the rear side down and back up again, and with that you basically recharge the weapon, and you have like a few more tries trying to ignite the primer that is inside the launcher and through the tube going to the rear end of the rocket. Now let's talk a little bit about my personal experience with use of the RPG-22s. I carried this type of launcher most of the time, especially back in the day. The reason being that rest of my team usually took RPG-26s, but we didn't have that many of those. We had a bit more of RPG-18s and RPG-22s, and the procedure to make this grenade launcher fire is a little bit more complex. But I dry fired enough on those launchers to basically be relatively quick and relatively efficient, and I really didn't have respect from that. So now let's talk about two separated incidents and both addressing this section of the launcher. So one was that I had the launcher on my back. I was running through concrete tiles on like a square, of course with the broken glass from the nearby buildings. So you can imagine that the broken glass on top of the concrete, it's pretty much like a ice skating rink. So when I'm running, I'm falling down, basically hitting this end of the launcher, and this entire rear section basically detached. Which of course wasn't really a problem to fire the launcher, but also the sling detached, and I really wasn't that experienced at that point to be capable to tell, okay, this launcher can be still launched safely or not. So that was one disappointment. Second disappointment was in 2022 when we basically initiated a fight. First was firing 84 and then I fired this RPG-22. On the infill under night vision we basically went through very steep downhill on like hard surface because it was like over a highway. All of us smashed our faces on the way down. So I smashed my face as well. Then 20 meters from the enemy, I basically had this launcher on my shoulder. Tried to arm it, but I couldn't arm it. I couldn't move this lever. Basically what happened is that this metal keepers got a bit twisted, which was a bit of a problem. What I did at that moment, because the 84 was already fired, I just quickly realigned it with some force, deattached it, and fired the launcher successfully. So basically disjoint, two separated issues. What you can also see that the bull spike actually addressed all that. You can see that here everything is nicely enclosed, nicely covered, there is no opening of the rear portion. We have just this rubber stuff that get opened by the blast. So in the further developments this issue was definitely addressed. Generally, because I fired quite a lot of those over my lifetime, I'm kind of confident with those and they basically work. The projectile is very comparable with the PG7 for RPG-7, specifically the M variant. When we look on the markings, here you can see RPG-22, made in 1990, probably in Bulgaria I suppose. The explosive filling is Ockfall explosive. VP-22 most likely addressing the projectile in my opinion. and it might be made, the projectile itself, in 1989. So that's my assumptions, and you can just see the generous marking. Here you have little table that basically tell you shoot in this direction, and also explain you the entire procedure, how to make it fire. So all good stuff there. Also the carry sling, you can see it's quite narrow, but since this rocket have only 2.7 kilograms, it's not really an issue. So now let's go to the range and let's go test it out on some interesting target or on brick wall. Alright, so this is the target. The distance is approximately 150 meters. We will see if I can hit out of the RPG-22. Alright, so you can see very clearly here that I'm coming to the position, gauging my target, see what I want to fire at, taking the RPG-22 Netto. So, first step, removing the safety pin, like so. You see the front of the launcher opened, extending, front side opened as well. Now putting the launcher to my shoulder, like so, pulling back on this. You see the rear opened, putting up this cover, and the trigger is right here. You could see that it exploded, but for some reason there was some delay. My personal bet is that it was just a soft ground. Backblast. So even from the delayed explosion, when the projectile basically made its way through with the use of the kinetic energy inside the soft ground, then a few seconds delay, and after it detonated, still the damage, the shrapnel damage, it's quite significant. You can see how there it was cutting almost vertically, but yeah, if this was infantry, they would have the PG-22 projectile making its way into the ground, cumulative one, and even, let's say, half a meter inside the ground exploding, still they would have a serious problem. Alright, so the forensic analytics is that the grenade from the RPG-22 hit it over there. The ground is very soft, so it just landed, didn't detonate, it tipped over. Basically what kicked in is the self-liquidator, auto-liquidator, when the rocket travels a certain distance and then it detonates. Anyway, that kicked in. Basically the rocket turned in the direction towards me, exploded, and the cumulative effect, pressure, the cavity, the jet of the molten metal went like so into the ground and stopped somewhere here, just traveling through the ground at least 1 meter, 1.2 meters. So very interesting. And this is the molten copper liner that the PG-22 have inside, or all other RPGs, right? So you can just see the molten metal and how the jet basically traveled, piercing the earth. Very nice, and this is very nice souvenir. I will definitely keep this one because it's really interesting. Alright guys, so what is the overall conclusion about RPG-22? For me it's the same like Ergeo, Erge and hand grenades. Those were the first hand grenades that I ever used in my life. But fortunately, with the supplies of Western stuff after 2022, now I realize even more how much better all the Western stuff is, and this grenade launcher is absolutely no exception. So, when we look at it, we see that we can't really collapse it, in case that we didn't decide to shoot. All the stuff that I talked about. When you're preparing it, you have basically pieces falling away from the launcher, which, okay, doesn't really matter, but it's not the most elegant solution. The performance is still okay against some light skin vehicle, soft skin vehicle, BTRs, but mainly, of course, for the urban fighting. This is okay, but we have modern tools. We have thermobaric rockets, we have anti-personnel single-shot RPGs. So RPG-22, legendary weapon, legendary status. But its time has passed and now we have just so much more better tools, and I'm very grateful to the Western suppliers and Western governments that we have that opportunity to use better stuff than this old legacy one. Thank you very much guys for watching. If you wish to support us, you can use the PayPal link down below or become YouTube member for extra videos.